Hi, Oriana.
Hi, Tom.
Hi, nice to see you.
Nice to meet you too.
Would you mind just telling me a little bit about the modules that you teach in the art histories department, please?
Sure. Well, I teach a year one module on bodies and context. So that's
Uh-huh.
looking at um, figuration in sculptures and paintings and multimedia artworks dealing with the body and representing the body from all the way from antiquity through to the present day, looking at a global perspective. Um, yeah, and it mirrors their studio practice because they're doing things like figure drawing and exploring ways of depicting the body in that first term.
Yeah.
So yeah, it really
Yeah.
follows on from that.
So the art history module in the first year that you teach runs parallel to what they're doing in the studio. So in the studio, they're making paintings and drawings about the human figure, and then in art histories, from what you said, then you're teaching them about the history of representation of the human figure.
Yes, absolutely.
And do you look at lots of artworks while you're teaching, or is it mainly theory based?
So it's a good mix, but in my teaching, we focus on um, images and looking at the kind of looking at art history by looking at actual objects, reproductions of objects, and focusing on kind of analyzing these works from the perspective of what they're actually depicting, what kinds of materials they're using, how they treat the form, doing a kind of basic formal analysis, and then thinking about the context, because it's bodies in context, thinking about the context in which these were made, the kinds of ideas, the kind of ideas of conceptions of beauty, for example, associated with the human form, and how that impacts on how they're being depicted by artists.
And then the theory that you bring into those discussions, um, presumably you look at feminist discourses and representations of people of color, and what
Yeah,
other kind of
absolutely.
theoretical models do you use?
Yeah, so we're definitely bringing in feminist theory and queer theory and Crip theory, so theory from the perspective of disability politics, and then theory around Black representation or people of color, post-colonial subjectivities.
Yeah.
All those things are being brought in, and um, they're getting that also with Matthew Rowe, who teaches the kind of theoretical uh, leg of the course.
Yeah.
But I definitely bring that stuff in and reinforce that by looking at objects and looking at artworks that have been um, influenced by those theories.
And do you find that students are already aware of that kind of those discourses, that theory, or are you introducing it to them for the first time?
I think for the most part, we're definitely introducing it for the first time. We definitely don't assume that they have prior knowledge,
Yeah.
and definitely catering towards making these ideas clear to someone who has no prior knowledge.
Okay. And then in the second year of the fine art, then they do a course called representations with you, right? So
Yes.
what does that involve?
So then they're building on that knowledge that they got in year one, and then again looking at more theories from those perspectives, specifically on representation, and thinking about at the beginning of the module, thinking about abstraction and the impact that had uh, in early modernism and high modernism, the impact of abstraction on representation,
Okay.
which is of course it was only a big deal in Western art because other non-Western cultures had been making and fluent in abstraction
Yeah.
for centuries.
Yeah.
Think about like Islamic traditions and um, other African traditions where abstraction was uh, much more prolific
Yeah.
for many years. Whereas in Western art, abstraction became really, really important during modernism. It was a big impact on a big change in how we represent form.
Okay.
Um, yeah. So we're talking about all those things and we're thinking about things like the Harlem Renaissance in the United States and the Black art movement in the UK,
Yeah.
and how those have impacted on representation, modes of representation, figuration,
Okay.
and abstraction. all the way up into the present day, thinking about things like the impact of the market or the marketization of art, and the advent of the business artist with someone like Andy Warhol, people like Jeff Koons, and then the YBAs, and and then moving into like queer representations and Crip representations again, like the way disability politics have impacted on modes of representation.
Yeah. Could you tell me a little bit about how you teach? I mean, is it in the traditional lecture format? I mean, you're clearly not dealing with kind of traditional art history as such. You know, it's a very contemporary theoretical approach. But could you tell me a little bit about the techniques and that you use when you're teaching in the classroom?
Yeah, I use definitely like a mixed bag of things. So there's a little straightforward lecturing, but there's a lot more interaction than in a kind of traditional art history class where you just be looking at, slide after slide and I'd be talking at you. But it's not like that. It's much more interactive. I do think, pair, share, like I pose a question, people have to pair up with someone they're next to and discuss it and then share. Also, another kind of fun thing I do is I've taken the premise of speed dating, but applied it to the formal analysis of artwork. So I have the students moving around the room, looking at different artworks and discussing and pairing up with a different person every few minutes to discuss a different artwork. And then, so sometimes I will do that in one lesson, and then as a way of reviewing, I'll take one couple or one pair of students and have them redo their discussion they had the day before and ask them some new questions and try to remember what we learned the previous week and discuss it again before moving on to the new material. Another fun thing I like to do is bring in a controversial artwork and have them take sides and debate, like, is this a successful political artwork, for example, or is it unsuccessful? So they take sides, and because it's usually a very divisive artwork I'll choose, it really provokes some really interesting conversations. And then another thing I do, I wanted to bring up, but now I'm forgetting what it is. My mind's gone blank.
It's because we're in the summer.
Yeah.
That's why. So it sounds to me that kind of much more participatory approach enables...
Oh, right. I thought of what it was.
Go on.
It was that I asked them to curate an exhibition. I print out reproductions of artworks, and then I have them in small groups discuss what the premise, like take on a curatorial role of discussing, which artworks they're going to exclude and which ones they're going to keep, or maybe they might bring in one that they know that relates to those artworks, and then they have to present to the class how they, the kind of rationale behind their curatorial choices.
So it sounds like that participatory approach, it's much more geared around the kind of production of knowledge by the students as much as it is the kind of dissemination of knowledge by you, the tutor. So can you also just maybe comment a little bit about the experience that students will have with you in the third year? So students write a thesis of 6,000 words, which is on a subject of their choosing, but we give very close tutorial support. We give 4 tutorials, 45-minute tutorials to help students develop their ideas and then build on their research and then construct the thesis. But could you tell me, maybe just kind of paint a little picture of what a typical thesis tutorial is like?
Well, it really, people come in with an idea of what, like on the first tutorial, for example, they'll come in with an idea of what they want to learn, they want to write about, and I might suggest texts to read or other artworks to look at that relates to the theme that they're thinking about. But then as the tutorials and the process of writing progresses, I will actually be reading drafts of what they've written, looking at their drafts, their in-progress bibliographies, giving them suggestions about what kinds of sources are really good sources for academic writing, and just helping them to structure what they're writing, and so that by the end they've really honed something, a strong piece of writing that they can feel confident about submitting.
Great.
Yeah, and the other thing is that obviously they also write essays in year 1 and year 2, and they do presentations, so they get a lot of feedback on those as well.
Yeah.
Which they can then look back on each year and see, okay, where are my strengths and where are the weaknesses, and what do I need to do to improve each year? And then by the time they're writing their thesis, they're producing really strong work for the most part. Yeah, I'm really impressed with what the students produce, and I think some of the third-year students even end up writing something that is, you know, just a step away from being publishable work.
Wow. Well, even on BA level.
Even on BA level, I think there's definitely just, you know, a handful each year that they could go through they're on their way towards a kind of peer review process where they could publish.
Wow. So I've just got one final question, and this question is kind of directed to you as the tutor, actually, because I think it's quite interesting for students to be kind of aware. But I was just interested in what aspect of the course do you enjoy the most as a tutor, as an art historian, as an artist yourself? Which aspects do you find most rewarding?
That's a good question. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the fact that I'm also an artist. I neglected to mention that I like to bring that perspective in, and sometimes even show examples of my work if it relates to the topic that we're addressing.
Yeah.
And yeah, so actually demonstrating the ways in which art history and theoretical ideas have impacted on me as an artist, I think then is really useful for the students. But that's not the thing I most enjoy. The thing I guess I most enjoy probably is those one-to-one tutorials and really seeing the student progress in that kind of in the context we have of those 4 tutorials.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I find the same, you know, working with the students from the first year right through to the third year, you really see a progression, don't you? So by the time they get to the third year, they're thinking critically and independently and applying that to their practice.
Yeah, and absolutely. And also the other thing we didn't say was that often that in the third year, when they're doing their dissertation, it's on a topic that relates to their own practice. They're not writing about their own work, but they're writing about artists whose practices relate to theirs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, thanks very much. I think that's really useful. I think any student applying to the course will find that really useful. So thanks very much, Oriana, and nice to see you.
Nice to see you
Okay.
too.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.